10.2 is the lesson that we have today. What factors led to British Columbia joining Confederation? We're going to figure that out and a couple of other things. So stick around and let's learn something. It is lesson 10.2. What factors led to British Columbia joining Confederation? British Columbia is our colony that is over on the Pacific Ocean. Well, it was a colony on the Pacific Ocean. And it was after 1867 when the settlers were starting to make their way westward into what was known as the Northwest Territories. From earlier chapters, we called this Rupert's Land. And the people that were heading out to the Northwest Territories, they wanted fertile farmland so that they could have a successful farm. British Columbia, on the other hand, not a lot of farmland available to them. It was all rock and mountains. So what was bringing people then to BC? Well, it was the gold rush and then some events obviously later on. But it was mainly the gold rush that was bringing people in, and that brought BC into Confederation. It started off as a colony, as a British colony, and it was the fur trade, just like with the rest of Canada, that was attracting people to the Pacific. But by 1849, only a few Europeans were actually there, and they lived in Fort Victoria on Vancouver Island. By 1850, the Hudson's Bay Company sets up a trading post on the Fraser River, and the First Nations started bringing gold to trade. Well, the Europeans saw dollar signs in their eyes, and word spread quickly that there was gold to be found in British Columbia. At that rumor, at that word, prospectors were just coming in at record numbers. And by 1858, so 8 years after the Hudson's Bay Company sets up a trading post, we've got 25,000 prospectors looking for gold along the banks of the Fraser River. Vancouver Island at the time was a colony, and the mainland was a British territory. So two different things, one being the colony, one being the territory. The colony is where the government is, and British territory is exactly that, territory. The governor at the time, this guy right here, James Douglas, he's worried about this sudden increase of these people coming in, these miners that are mining for gold. Most of the people coming in were Americans, and he was worried that what would happen in BC would kind of be the same as what was happening with the California gold rush that happened earlier, and there was lawlessness in California. It was a free-for-all. So learning from the mistakes of California, Governor James Douglas, he starts issuing licenses to miners to mine for gold in the British territory of British Columbia. He also then created a police force, and he appointed judges to enforce the laws that the police force were also trying to enforce. The gold mining, unfortunately, caused salmon to leave the river. The salmon stock was leaving the river, and because of that, this was how the First Nations were surviving. They were surviving off of this salmon. So the First Nations, they blockaded the access to the river to these miners. The miners aren't going to like that, so obviously violence is going to erupt, and then the governor, James Douglas, promises to protect the First Nations with that police force that he was going to create. And then in 1858, British Columbia, they now have this colony that is created. So it goes from a territory into a colony. And the fort at Victoria stays as is and becomes the administrative center for this British Columbia colony. So where is this gold? Well, the gold follows the Fraser River up to the Cariboo Mountains. You can see here on the map, the Cariboo Mountains are in the top right-hand side of the image that's there. To get up there, the governor decides that he is going to build a road, and it's called the Cariboo Road, and it's completed in 1865. at a cost of $1 million. It stretched over 650 kilometers and started in New Westminster, I should say. And New Westminster is in present-day Vancouver. And it terminated in Bakerville, which was the largest city at the time, up in the northern part here of the image. It terminated in Bakerville, which was the largest city north of San Francisco and west of Chicago. So that is impressive in itself right there. So this was a new beginning for British Columbia, because the gold is only going to last for so long. It's a finite amount. So after the gold rush ended in 1868, they burned Bakerville to the ground, and they learned from this gold rush, and they moved forward from the gold rush. There were some positive outcomes of this gold rush. Victoria, Fort Victoria, this is now Victoria, turns into a thriving business and economic and government center. Many newcomers, they decided that BC is a place that they want to stay, so they built farms in the southern BC area, and they had successful businesses. Britain came over and they set up a proper government, and they started building all kinds of new roads. So there is now a permanent settlement on the Pacific coast by 1870, late 1860s. A spin-off industry from the gold rush was that of the logging industry, and this became their economic driving force for quite some time. And it brought over francophones as well from Quebec. About 40 Canadian families made their way over and made their homes in BC. So that this was happening around the late 1860s. BC, though, wasn't just home to francophones. They were also home to many First Nations, where they were hunting sea mammals, and they gathered shellfish, and they fished the rivers. But like on the prairies, there was a difficult time adjusting to the newcomers that were coming in. So in 1850 and 1854, Governor Douglas bought 14 parcels of land from the First Nations to set up small reserves for them. He recognized their right to hunt and fish on unoccupied land, and this caused the First Nations to move off of their traditional lands and make way for the newcomers. But the First Nations, they fought back. And in 1864, there was an attack on a road crew, because remember, BC is now building a lot of roads, and they attacked this crew because this crew was working there without permission from the First Nations. The crew in working on these roads, they were accused of raiding villages and looting graves and all that kind of stuff. So the First Nations, they responded by killing members of these road crews that were up there building these roads. So there's this conflict that is there. Well, what is going to be the response to this conflict? Well, the response to the conflict is that British soldiers are going to come and end this conflict, because British Columbia is still a British colony. So Britain is going to pay for their defense. So the British soldiers, they go up there, they end this conflict, and they arrest the men from the First Nation tribes that's up there, and they tried them for murder. The judge agrees that yes, the First Nations were invaded, they were provoked, but still the First Nations men were found guilty for the crimes that they committed against this road crew, and they were hanged. That was their punishment. In response to that, the governor in 1865 passes a law making it illegal to loot the graves of anyone. So now grave looting is going to be illegal. So we're going to go back to Britain and its territory and all of everything included with that. And now we've got a colony on the Pacific. So the British now have one colony on the Pacific side of North America. The south of British Columbia, we've got the United States, and Russia has Alaska to the north. So the British only have British Columbia. And it was providing Britain with fur and gold, just like the rest of Canada was, except BC had more gold to provide. It also provided the British a place for their fleet. And in exchange for that, Britain is going to pay for the colony's defense and government. The problem was that the gold rush became a very expensive time in the history of British Columbia, and the colonies there of Vancouver Island and British Columbia, they almost went bankrupt. So Britain is like, well, why are we keeping these colonies? What's the point of having both of these colonies and having a redundant expenses? So they decide to unite Vancouver Island and British Columbia as one colony here on the Pacific side. And the government continued to meet the financial needs of the colony because now it's one, it's a little bit easier. But the problem was that the colony was still in debt. And it was the cost of services and roads that were causing this to become a very expensive thing to do. But there were some other problems, too, that were facing some other challenges to BC. Canada was making its way out west from the east, so they were expanding across the prairies. When Canada became a country in 1867, that same year, the United States purchases Alaska from Russia. And to the south is the United States and the state of Washington, which now had a booming population. That combined with the debt of the colony, it was time for BC to decide what are they going to do. Are we going to stay a British colony? A colony that is going to be in debt, but a colony that the British are helping to pay for? Should we join Canada, become the next province after Manitoba? Or the United States is looking pretty good. Maybe we should join the United States. So in 1870, British Columbia officials travel out to Ottawa, where talks to join Canada take place. If British Columbia is going to join Canada, the government of Canada is going to have to meet some demands that BC has. Number one, pay for BC's debts. Number two, build a road connecting the prairies to the Pacific so that we can transport goods and people, and make an annual payment to British Columbia from the Canadian government. Canada agrees to all of this and does one better. And they, instead of agreeing to build a road, Canada agrees to build a transcontinental railway within 10 years of BC joining Canada. That is an amazing feat. So obviously, the delegates from British Columbia are going to be like, oh yeah, this is awesome. We approve this deal. And on July 20th, 1871, British Columbia becomes Canada's 6th province. And one of the biggest cities in Canada eventually is that of Vancouver. And now that we are in Canada, Vancouver starts to grow at a pretty healthy rate. Vancouver originally started as a small village, a sawmill village actually, in Granville. And Granville Island still exists today in Vancouver. It's a beautiful place to go and visit. It is also nicknamed Gas Town as well. And the railway arrives and Granville becomes Vancouver in 1886. Because remember, Canada promised to build that railway. Eventually, the railway does make its way to Granville, and then they change the name to Vancouver. Granville stays as a neighborhood, but the name itself of the city changes to Vancouver, named after George Vancouver. And the port of Granville, which is now Vancouver, becomes a bustling center. And we've got cargo coming from all over the place. We've got cargo coming from Australia and Asia that gets loaded onto trains and shipped or trained out west, or I guess it would be east from BC, to reach the Atlantic provinces, and vice versa. The Atlantic provinces are shipping stuff out west to BC to be loaded onto ships to go to Asia and Australia. The families that are working in Vancouver, They're going to be living close to jobs, and the wealthier families, they are going to be making their homes near English Bay, which is now a neighborhood and an area of the city of Vancouver. Another very beautiful place. Later on, streetcars are built and trams too, and now this is giving people the ability to move, and they can go and live kind of wherever they want. Some wealthy families end up moving south, and they have this beautiful view of the city and mountain views that still exist today. So if you ever get a chance, now you know some of the history behind the growth of Vancouver. All right, head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.